I want to tell you about something I discovered many years ago that transformed not only my own relationship with money but the lives of thousands who dared to test it. I call it the 10% rule, and I need you to understand something right from the start. This isn't about charity. This isn't about being a good person or earning cosmic brownie points. This is about activating a law as reliable as gravity, as consistent as the sunrise, as mathematical as compound interest. I'm talking about the law of increase. And when you understand how to work with it, your income doesn't just grow, it multiplies. It expands in ways that will make you look back at your current financial situation and wonder how you ever accepted so little. Let me be direct with you. Right now, you might be struggling. You might be working hard, doing everything right according to the world's standards, and still finding yourself stuck at the same income level month after month, year after year. You've tried budgeting, you've tried working longer hours, you've tried side hustles and investment schemes and all the practical advice the experts dish out, and maybe some of it helped a little, but nothing created that breakthrough you're hungry for. Nothing opened the floodgates. I'm here to tell you why. You've been trying to get more by holding tighter. You've been trying to increase by decreasing your outflow. You've been operating from a consciousness of lack, and the universe can only give you more of what you are in consciousness. If you are in lack consciousness, you get more lack. If you are in abundance consciousness, you get more abundance. It's law. It's principle. And the 10% rule is the fastest way I know to shift from one consciousness to the other. Now I know what you're thinking. You're thinking this sounds too simple. You're thinking there must be a catch. You're thinking about your bills and your debts and your responsibilities, and you're already calculating whether you can afford to give away 10% of anything. But here's what I need you to understand. You can't afford not to. Every day you operate from lack consciousness is another day you magnetize more lack into your experience. The 10% rule isn't about giving away something you need. It's about declaring to your subconscious mind, to the universe, to the infinite intelligence that governs all things, that you are abundant, that there is always more, that you live in an expanding universe of infinite supply. I didn't come to this understanding through theory. I came to it through desperation, through trial, through error, and finally through breakthrough. And once I tested it and proved it in my own life, I began sharing it with others, and I watched in amazement as person after person reported the same results. Income doubling, unexpected windfalls, promotions appearing out of nowhere, business opportunities knocking at the door. And always, the same statement. I have more now, giving away 10% than I ever had when I kept 100%. Are you ready to understand why? Are you ready to learn not just what to do, but how the invisible mechanics work? Because I'm going to take you deep into this principle. I'm going to show you the psychology, the spirituality, and the practical mechanics of multiplying your income through the law of increase. And by the time we're finished, you're going to have a choice. You can go back to doing things the way you've always done them, getting the results you've always gotten. Or you can take this principle, test it for yourself, and watch your financial reality transform before your eyes. Everything in this universe operates according to law. The seasons change according to law. Seeds grow into plants according to law. Your body heals itself according to law. And wealth flows according to law. The law of increase is one of the most powerful laws governing prosperity, and yet almost nobody understands it. They think prosperity is about getting. It's not. It's about circulating. It's about flow. It's about understanding that you live in an abundant universe that wants to give you more, but it can only give you more when you demonstrate that you're a good steward of circulation. When water stops flowing, it stagnates. When blood stops circulating, you die. When money stops moving through you, when you dam it up out of fear, you cut yourself off from the very source of supply you're trying to access. The 10% rule is simple in description but profound in effect. You take 10% of every dollar that comes to you, and you give it away in a very specific way. Not randomly. Not to just anyone. Not to ease your guilt or fulfill an obligation. You give it where you receive your spiritual nourishment, your inspiration, your truth. You give it as a tithe to the source that feeds your soul. For some people that's a church. For others it's a teacher. For others still it's an organization doing work that uplifts consciousness. The key is this. You give it with joy, with gratitude, and with absolute faith that this action is setting into motion forces that must, by law, bring you increase. Now let me tell you why this works, and I want you to follow me carefully because this is where most people get it wrong. They think tithing is about the money. It's not about the money at all. The money is just the symbol, the vehicle. What you're really doing when you practice the 10% rule is reprogramming your subconscious mind. You're making a bold declaration to the deeper levels of your consciousness that you believe in abundance, that you trust in infinite supply, that you are not afraid, and your subconscious mind, which controls approximately 95% of your behavior and creates your reality through the images and beliefs you hold, accepts this new programming. It begins to operate from abundance instead of scarcity, and when your subconscious operates from abundance, you start noticing opportunities you would have missed before. You start taking actions you would have been too afraid to take before. You start attracting people and circumstances that match your new consciousness. The outer world, which is always a reflection of your inner world, must rearrange itself to match your new dominant mental state. But there's more. There's a spiritual dimension to this that goes beyond psychology. When you give 10% with the right consciousness, you're not just reprogramming yourself. You're connecting with a universal law of reciprocity. You're planting seeds in the invisible realm, in what I call the universal subconscious, and those seeds must produce a harvest. Jesus taught this principle when he said, "Give, and it shall be given unto you, good measure, pressed down, shaken together, and running over." He wasn't speaking poetry. He was describing law. He was telling you that the universe operates on a principle of reciprocity, and when you give with faith and love, you set into motion a return that exceeds what you gave. I've seen this work in the most remarkable ways. I've seen people on the verge of bankruptcy start tithing, and within weeks receive unexpected checks in the mail, job offers with double their previous salary, business contracts that seem to appear out of thin air. I've seen it in my own life, more times than I can count. And every single time, it's the same pattern. First comes the decision to give, then comes the inner shift in consciousness, then comes the outer manifestation of increased income. It's so reliable that I consider it one of the most practical pieces of spiritual wisdom anyone can apply. But here's what you need to understand. The 10% rule only works when you do it right. If you give out of obligation, it won't work. If you give resentfully, it won't work. If you give and then immediately worry about how you'll pay your bills, you've just canceled out the entire process because your consciousness is still in lack. You must give joyfully. You must give with the absolute conviction that you are not depleting yourself but planting seeds. You must give and then release it completely, trusting that the law is working even when you can't see evidence yet. This is where faith comes in. Not blind faith, not wishful thinking, but faith based on understanding of how consciousness operates, how the universe responds to your dominant mental states, how cause and effect works in the invisible realm before manifesting in the visible. Let me tell you something else that's vitally important. The 10% is not the ceiling. It's the floor. It's the minimum required to activate the law of increase in your life. But once you start experiencing the results, once you see how this principle works, you'll find yourself wanting to give more, not because anyone tells you to, not because you should, but because you'll viscerally understand that giving accelerates increase. You'll understand that you're not the source of your supply. The universe is the source. The infinite intelligence is the source. And that source is limitless. You're just a channel. And the wider you open the channel through giving, the more can flow through you. Some of the wealthiest people I've known give 30%, 40%, even 50% of their income, and they keep getting richer because they understand this principle at a depth most people never reach. This is about so much more than money, though. When you practice the 10% rule, when you really commit to it and do it consistently, something happens to you as a person. You become more generous in all areas of your life. You become more trusting. You become less anxious about the future. You stop living in survival mode and start living in creative mode. You begin to see opportunities where you used to see only obstacles. Your relationships improve because you're not operating from neediness anymore. Your health improves because you're not carrying the stress of scarcity consciousness. Your entire life expands because you've tapped into the law of increase, and that law doesn't just apply to money. It applies to everything. More love, more joy, more peace, more ideas, more energy, More of everything good flows to you when you align yourself with increased consciousness rather than decreased consciousness. I want to share with you now the story of how I came to discover this principle, because I think it will help you understand that I didn't always know these things. I wasn't born with some special gift or advantage. I struggled, I doubted, I failed. And it was through my struggles that I stumbled onto truths that changed everything. Are you ready to hear it? Because this story contains within it the seeds of your own transformation, if you're willing to learn from it. Years ago, I was in a very difficult financial situation. I had bills I couldn't pay. I had responsibilities I couldn't meet. I had people depending on me, and I felt like I was failing them. I tried everything I knew to do. I worked longer hours. I took on extra jobs. I cut expenses to the bone, and nothing seemed to help. I was caught in what I now understand was a consciousness of lack, and that consciousness was creating more lack in my experience no matter what actions I took. I was stuck in a cycle, and I couldn't see a way out. Then one day, I was listening to a lecture by a wise teacher, a man who had dedicated his life to understanding spiritual law and how it applies to practical living. He was talking about tithing, about the ancient principle of giving the first fruits, about how this practice had been used throughout history by those who understood the invisible laws governing prosperity. And he said something that struck me like lightning. He said most people think they can't afford to tithe, but the truth is they can't afford not to, because they're starving themselves spiritually and financially by operating from fear and holding consciousness. Something in me recognized the truth in those words. Something deeper than my rational mind, deeper than my fear, knew that this was a key I had been missing. But my ego immediately rebelled. My logical mind started calculating. I literally cannot afford to give away 10% of my income, it said. I barely have enough as it is. If I give away 10%, I'll be even worse off. The argument seemed completely reasonable, but I had reached a point of such desperation that I was willing to try anything. I thought to myself, what I'm doing now isn't working. What do I have to lose by trying something radically different? So I made a decision. I decided I would test this principle for 3 months. I would take 10% of every dollar that came in, no matter how little it was, and I would give it with gratitude to the source of my spiritual nourishment, which at that time was a small church where I had been learning these principles. I would do it faithfully, I would do it joyfully, and I would watch what happened. I made a commitment to myself that I would not judge the results prematurely, that I would give the law time to work, that I would maintain my faith even when circumstances looked bleak. The first month was terrifying. I'll be honest with you. I gave that 10% and immediately my mind started screaming at me that I had made a terrible mistake. Bills came due, unexpected expenses appeared, and my bank account looked lower than ever because now I was giving away part of what little I had. But I had made a commitment, so I held steady. I kept affirming to myself that I lived in an abundant universe, that the law was working, that increase was on its way. I refused to let my outer circumstances dictate my inner state. This was perhaps the most important part of the entire practice. The outer world will always test your faith when you start working with these principles. It will always show you evidence that contradicts what you're affirming. This is not because the law isn't working, it's because your old consciousness, your old patterns, are still manifesting in your experience. There's a time lag between when you plant the seed in your subconscious mind and when the harvest appears in your physical world. Think of it like this. When you plant a seed in your garden, you don't dig it up the next day and complain that there's no tree. You understand that growth takes time. You give it sunlight, you trust the process. The same principle applies to your mental seeds. During this lag time, this is where most people fail. They plant the seed of their desire through visualization and feeling. They do it for a day, maybe a week. They start to feel hopeful. But then, when they look around and see the same old circumstances, the same job, the same bank account, the same relationship problems, they say, "See, I knew it wouldn't work. This stuff is nonsense." And in that moment of doubt, in that moment of reverting back to the old consciousness, they uproot the seed before it has a chance to break through the soil. You must be persistent. You must be faithful. Not blind faith, but understanding faith based on the knowledge that your subconscious mind is working right now, even when you can't see the evidence yet. Let me give you a practical example. I once counseled a man who came to me desperate for financial relief. He was deeply in debt, creditors calling day and night, facing possible bankruptcy. I taught him this technique. Every night before sleep, he was to imagine himself receiving a specific sum of money, not just seeing it, but feeling the relief, the gratitude, the freedom that money would bring. He did this faithfully for 3 weeks. Nothing changed. In fact, things seemed to get worse. He received another demand letter. His car broke down. He came back to me frustrated, ready to give up. I told him what I'm telling you now. The law is working. Your old consciousness is simply finishing its manifestation. Keep planting the new seed. Do not waver, he continued. And in the 4th week, something remarkable happened. An old business associate contacted him out of the blue about a deal he'd forgotten about years ago. That deal came through, and he received more than enough to clear his debts. Was this coincidence? Was this luck? No. This was law. This was the subconscious mind, impressed with the feeling of financial freedom, orchestrating circumstances, people, and events to bring about the physical equivalent of that mental state. The key here is understanding that you're not trying to manipulate external conditions. You're changing your internal state, and the external world must conform to match it. This is how the law works. Now, I want to address something that often comes up. But Joseph, what if I've been trying to impress something on my subconscious for weeks, months even, and nothing has changed? This is where most people get discouraged. They give up right at the threshold of their breakthrough. Let me explain what's really happening. When you plant a seed in the ground, you don't dig it up every day to check if it's growing. You water it, you ensure it gets sunlight, and you trust the natural process. The same principle applies to your subconscious mind. The lag between impression and expression is not failure, it's incubation. Your subconscious is working on your desire even when you see no evidence in the physical world. This is where faith becomes practical, not religious. Let me share something that happened to a man in my congregation years ago. He came to me desperate, unemployed for 8 months. Every interview ended in rejection. He was applying the techniques I taught, visualizing, affirming, but nothing was happening. I asked him one question. When you finish your visualization, how do you feel the rest of the day? He was honest. Anxious. Worried. I keep checking job boards obsessively. I panic when the mail comes. There was his problem. He was impressing his desire for 10 minutes in the morning, then spending 16 waking hours impressing fear, lack, and desperation. The subconscious was receiving mixed signals, and it was accepting the dominant impression, which was anxiety. I gave him new instructions. Instead of more visualization, I told him to catch himself every single time worry arose and immediately replace it with this simple thought: my subconscious knows exactly what to do. That's it. Nothing elaborate. Within 2 weeks, he received a call from a company he'd interviewed with months before. A position had suddenly opened up. They remembered him. He got the job, with better pay than he'd originally asked for. What changed? Not the external circumstances first. His internal state changed. He stopped contradicting his morning impressions with his daily mental habits. And this is where most people stumble. They have a beautiful vision in the morning meditation. They feel it deeply. They get that inner conviction. And then they walk into their day and immediately start contradicting it. They say to a friend, "Oh, I'm still struggling with money." They look at their bank account and feel the old familiar panic. They gossip about their problems. They rehearse their limitations. Every word, every thought, every emotional reaction is now working against the seed they planted in consciousness. You cannot plant an apple seed in the morning and pour acid on it all day long and expect to harvest apples. Yet this is exactly what millions do with their prayers, their affirmations, their visualizations. They do the work for 5 minutes and then spend the remaining hours of the day mentally living in the old state. I want you to understand something crucial about how consciousness operates. Your subconscious mind doesn't argue with you. It doesn't say, "Well, you affirmed wealth this morning, but you've been complaining about bills all afternoon, so I'll just average it out." No. It accepts as true whatever you persistently feel to be true. Whichever state you occupy most frequently becomes your dwelling place, and your dwelling place becomes externalized. This is why I emphasize the phrase "live in the end." Don't just visit the end during your meditation. Don't just vacation there for 5 minutes before bed. Move in. Take up residence. Make it your mental address. When someone asks you how you're doing, and every fiber of the old habit wants to recite your problems, pause. Even if you say nothing, don't inwardly rehearse the lack. The conversation you have with yourself is far more important than the conversation you have with them. I knew a woman who was estranged from her daughter for 3 years. 3 painful years of silence, of hurt, of that aching void where love should flow freely. She came to understand these principles. Every night, she would enter into a scene that implied reconciliation. She would hear her daughter's voice on the phone, warm and loving. She would feel the embrace. She made it real in consciousness. But here's what made the difference. During the day, when friends asked about her daughter, she didn't say, "We're not speaking." She would simply smile and say, "She's well," and inwardly feel the truth of their reconciliation. She stopped attending the pity parties in her own mind. She stopped feeding the story of separation and began nourishing the reality she wanted to experience. And then something remarkable happened. Not immediately, not the next day, but within 3 weeks, her daughter called. The conversation was brief, a little awkward at first, but it was warm. Within 2 months, they were having dinner together regularly. The mother told me later, with tears in her eyes, "I didn't force anything. I didn't manipulate. I simply changed the channel in my own consciousness, and the outer world tuned in." That's the mechanics of it. Your subconscious mind doesn't know the difference between a vividly imagined experience and a real one. When you imagine with feeling, when you persist in that imagination, your subconscious accepts it as fact and begins to reshape your outer circumstances to match your inner conviction. Now, let's address something that troubles many people. They say, "But Joseph, I've been thinking positively for years, and nothing's changed." And my response is always the same: thinking positively is not enough. You can affirm something 1,000 times a day, but if underneath that affirmation is a deeper belief in its opposite, you're simply painting over rust. The rust will always show through. True change happens when you impress your subconscious mind, not just your conscious mind. And your subconscious is impressed by feeling, by repetition, by the hypnotic state between waking and sleeping, and by mental imagery that carries emotional conviction. Let me give you another example. I knew a salesman who was struggling terribly. Every morning he would say to himself, "I'm a great salesman. I'm going to make lots of sales today." But every evening he came home defeated, and before sleep he would replay every rejection, every door slammed in his face, every humiliating moment. His conscious mind was affirming success, but his subconscious mind was being fed failure. And which one won? The subconscious always wins. Always. Because the subconscious is where your real beliefs live, where your true convictions reside. You see, the subconscious doesn't care about your morning affirmations if you spend your evening dwelling in defeat. It's like trying to fill a bucket while someone else drills holes in the bottom. You can pour all the positive thoughts you want into your mind during the day, but if you're draining them out with negative emotions at night, you'll never make progress. I told this salesman something simple. Your last thought before sleep is a seed. What kind of crop do you want to harvest? He looked at me puzzled. So I explained it further. Every night, before you drift into sleep, your conscious mind relaxes its guard. The critical faculty that usually filters information becomes drowsy, becomes permeable. This is when your subconscious is most receptive, most impressionable. If you plant seeds of failure in that sacred moment, if you replay your rejections, your embarrassments, your defeats, then you're programming your subconscious mind for more of the same. You're literally instructing your deeper mind to create more experiences that match those feelings. But here's the beautiful truth. You can change this pattern tonight. Right now, you can decide that from this day forward, your last waking thoughts will be thoughts of gratitude, success, and peace. Not forced affirmations. Not desperate pleading. But quiet, confident acceptance of the good that is already yours. That salesman began a new practice. Each night, regardless of how his day went, he would lie in bed and say, "I am grateful for my growing success. I see myself serving customers with joy. I accept abundance as my natural state." He didn't argue with his day. He didn't deny his challenges. He simply chose to end each day by planting different seeds. Within 3 weeks, everything changed. His sales tripled, his confidence soared, Opportunities that had been invisible suddenly appeared everywhere. Did the world change? No. His consciousness changed, and therefore his world changed. This is the fundamental principle that most people never grasp. They're waiting for the world to change first. They're waiting for the right opportunity, the right person, the right moment. But the truth is, the world you see is already a reflection of your inner consciousness. When you change within, the outer world must, and I emphasize times rearrange itself to correspond with your new inner state. Let me give you another example. I once counseled a woman who was convinced that her workplace was filled with hostile, unfriendly people. Every day, she would come home exhausted, drained by what she called the toxic environment. She was certain that if she could just find a new job, everything would be better. I asked her a simple question: how do you see yourself at work? She paused, then admitted, I feel like I don't belong. I feel like everyone is judging me, like I'm not good enough. There it was. Her inner conviction was creating her outer experience. She wasn't reacting to hostile people, she was projecting her own sense of inadequacy onto her environment and then experiencing it as reality. I instructed her to change her inner conversation. Every morning before work, and every evening before sleep, she was to affirm, I am valued and respected. I belong exactly where I am. People respond to me with warmth and kindness. Within 2 weeks, she reported that her coworkers seemed different. They were friendlier, more open. Within a month, she was invited to lunch by colleagues who had previously ignored her. Within 2 months, she received a promotion. Did her coworkers change? Not fundamentally. But her consciousness changed, and therefore the way they responded to her changed. She stopped broadcasting signals of inadequacy and started broadcasting confidence and belonging. The world simply reflected back to her what she was emanating from within. This is not mysticism. This is not wishful thinking. This is the precise operation of consciousness. Your subconscious mind is always expressing itself through your body, your circumstances, and your relationships. When you impress a new belief upon it, it begins immediately to externalize that belief as your experience. The question you must ask yourself is this: what am I impressing upon my subconscious mind right now? What beliefs am I holding in consciousness? Because whatever they are becoming your reality, whether you're aware of it or not. You see, most people are walking through life in a kind of hypnotic trance, completely unconscious of the dominant thoughts and feelings they're holding. They're reacting to circumstances, absorbing the opinions of others, accepting limitations that were handed to them in childhood, and all the while, their subconscious mind is faithfully reproducing these patterns in their external world. Let me give you a concrete example. I once counseled a woman who came to me deeply distressed about her financial situation. She had been struggling with money her entire adult life, always just barely getting by, always one emergency away from disaster. As we talked, I asked her to describe her earliest memories about money. And immediately, her face changed. She told me about sitting at the kitchen table as a young girl, listening to her parents argue bitterly about bills. She remembered her mother saying, over and over, "We'll never get ahead, money just slips through our fingers." Do you see what happened? That little girl absorbed those words as truth. She impressed them upon her subconscious mind night after night, year after year. And her subconscious, being completely impersonal and non-selective, accepted this as instruction. It didn't judge whether this belief was good or bad, helpful or harmful. It simply said, this is what she believes about money, so this is what I will create for her. For 30 years, this woman lived out that childhood programming. She worked hard, sometimes holding 2 jobs, but the money always slipped through her fingers, just as her mother had declared it would. This wasn't because she was unlucky or cursed. It was because she was carrying a deeply impressed belief that was operating beneath her conscious awareness. When I explained this to her, she was stunned. She had never made the connection. We began working together to consciously impress new beliefs upon her subconscious mind. Every night before sleep, she would affirm, "Money flows to me easily and abundantly. I am a channel for divine prosperity. Wealth is my natural state." At first, these words felt hollow to her, even false. But I encouraged her to persist, to feel the truth of these statements as if they were already manifest in her life. Within 6 months, everything had shifted. She received an unexpected promotion. Old debts were forgiven. New opportunities emerged, seemingly out of nowhere. She didn't change her circumstances through force or manipulation. She changed her inner conviction, and her circumstances rearranged themselves accordingly. This is the secret that transforms lives. Your subconscious mind doesn't argue with you. It doesn't debate whether your assumptions are reasonable or unreasonable, possible or impossible. It simply accepts what you persistently impress upon it, and works tirelessly to bring it into manifestation. When you understand this principle, you realize that you've been programming your subconscious your entire life, sometimes consciously, but most often unconsciously. Every time you say, "I can't afford that," you're giving your subconscious an instruction. Every time you think, "I'm not smart enough," you're planting a seed. Every time you feel unworthy, you're creating a blueprint that your deeper mind follows with absolute precision. The question isn't whether you're programming your subconscious. The question is, are you doing it deliberately or by default? Most people program their minds by default. They absorb the beliefs of their parents, their culture, their peer groups. They accept limitations as facts rather than recognizing them as suggestions that can be rejected. They live in a trance of inherited beliefs, never questioning whether these beliefs serve them or sabotage them. But you don't have to live this way. You can become the deliberate architect of your inner world. You can choose what seeds to plant in the fertile soil of your subconscious mind. Let me share with you a simple but profound technique that has transformed countless lives. I call it the practice of revision. Every evening before sleep, review your day. But here's the crucial part. Don't just review it as it happened. Revise it as you wish it had happened. If you had a difficult conversation that went poorly, replay it in your imagination with a different outcome. See yourself calm, confident, articulate. Feel the satisfaction of expressing yourself clearly. Experience the warmth of mutual understanding. If you faced rejection, revise it into acceptance. If you felt fear, revise it into courage. If you experienced lack, revise it into abundance. This isn't denial. This isn't pretending that problems don't exist. This is reconditioning your subconscious mind to expect different outcomes. You're overriding old patterns with new ones. You're teaching your deeper mind what to create tomorrow by changing what you accept about today. Your subconscious doesn't know the difference between a vividly imagined experience and a real one. When you revise your day with feeling and sensory detail, you're creating new neural pathways. You're establishing new beliefs about who you are and what's possible for you. This practice becomes even more powerful when you make it a nightly ritual. Before you drift off to sleep, take 15 minutes to mentally rewrite your day. Did someone's comment upset you? Revise it. See yourself responding with confidence and grace. Did you miss an opportunity? Revise it. See yourself seizing that moment with courage and clarity. Did you react with fear when you wanted to act with faith? Revise it. See yourself moving forward with absolute certainty. I cannot overstate how transformative this becomes when you do it consistently. You see, your subconscious mind is most impressionable in those drowsy moments before sleep. The critical, analytical part of your mind, the gatekeeper, begins to relax its hold. This is when your subconscious is wide open, receptive, ready to accept new impressions. When you revise your day in this state, you're programming yourself at the deepest level. And here's what happens over time. You begin to notice that the negative patterns stop repeating. The situations that used to trigger you no longer have the same power. The people who could always push your buttons somehow stop finding those buttons. It's not that the world has changed, although it often appears that way. It's that you have changed internally, and your external world is simply reflecting that inner transformation back to you. Let me share something that happened to me years ago when I first discovered this principle. I had a colleague who seemed to delight in undermining my work. Every meeting, every presentation, there he was with some criticism, some subtle attempt to diminish what I was doing. I would go home frustrated, replaying these interactions, feeling victimized and powerless. Then I learned about revision. That night, I revised the entire scene. I imagined the meeting again, but this time I saw him nodding in agreement. I heard him offering genuine support. I felt the warmth of mutual respect between us. I did this with feeling, with sensory richness, as though it were actually happening. I continued this practice for several nights. And then something remarkable occurred. In our next actual meeting, his entire demeanor had shifted. He was cordial, respectful, even complimentary. Now, the skeptic would say this was coincidence. But I've seen this principle work too many times, in too many lives, to dismiss it as mere chance. When you change your mind about someone, you change their relationship to you. And remember, the subconscious mind of the person you're thinking about is in rapport with yours. Your thoughts, when charged with feeling and conviction, register in their deeper mind. This is not mysticism. This is the law of mind in action. I once counseled a woman who was convinced her adult daughter hated her. Years of estrangement had built up such resentment that every phone call ended in argument. She came to me bitter and defeated, certain the relationship was beyond repair. I asked her a simple question. What do you want to be true? She looked at me as though I'd asked her to wish upon a star, but I pressed her. Do you want harmony? Do you want love between you? Of course I do, she said. But it's too late. I told her it's never too late to change a mental pattern. I instructed her to spend 10 minutes every night, just before sleep, imagining her daughter calling her with warmth in her voice. She was to hear her daughter say, "Mom, I love you. I'm sorry for the distance between us." She was to feel the embrace, the reconciliation, the joy of restoration. For 3 weeks, nothing changed in the external world. But something was shifting within her. The bitterness began to dissolve. The rehearsed arguments she carried in her mind started to fade. She stopped bracing for conflict. And then, one evening, her daughter called. Not with hostility, but with an olive branch. Within 2 months, they were meeting for lunch. Within 6, they were closer than they'd been in a decade. What happened? The mother stopped feeding the negative pattern. She stopped energizing the story of estrangement. And in doing so, she withdrew the mental fuel that sustained the conflict. Her subconscious, now impregnated with a new image, began to orchestrate circumstances in alignment with that image. The daughter felt the shift, even without knowing why. The invisible chords of mind responded to a new frequency. Within weeks, the relationship transformed. The daughter became respectful, affectionate, even helpful, not because she was coerced, but because the mother had changed the invisible blueprint. She stopped reacting to the old pattern, and instead acted from a new assumption. This is the secret that most people miss entirely. They try to change the outer world while leaving the inner blueprint untouched. They push, manipulate, argue, and demand. But the subconscious doesn't respond to force, it responds to impression. And once that impression is changed, the outer world has no choice but to rearrange itself accordingly. Now let me give you another example, this one from the realm of health. A man came to me years ago complaining of chronic insomnia. He had tried every remedy, consulted numerous doctors, taken pills that left him groggy and depressed. Nothing worked. His nights were torture, his days a fog. I asked him a simple question. What do you say to yourself every night before bed? He looked at me, puzzled. Then he answered honestly, I usually think, here we go again. Another sleepless night. I'll be exhausted tomorrow. There it was. Every single night, he was impressing upon his subconscious the very condition he dreaded. He was programming failure into his sleep before his head even touched the pillow. His subconscious, dutiful servant that it is, accepted this instruction and delivered precisely what he expected. I gave him a new habit. Every night, as he lay down, he was to repeat quietly, with feeling, I sleep soundly and peacefully. I wake refreshed and restored. Not as a desperate plea, but as a calm statement of fact. He was to visualize himself sleeping deeply, breathing easily, waking with vitality. The first few nights, nothing changed. The old pattern was still dominant, but he persisted. He impressed the new idea over and over, gently but consistently. Within 2 weeks, his sleep began to normalize. Within a month, insomnia was a distant memory. The subconscious had accepted the new impression, and the body followed suit. You see, your body is not separate from your mind, it is an extension of it, a physical manifestation of the beliefs you hold deep within. When you change the belief, the body responds. When you change the mental image, the flesh obeys. This is not mysticism, it is law, as reliable as gravity. I have seen this law work in cases that would astound the casual observer. A woman came to me once, her hands twisted with arthritis, unable to hold a cup without pain. The doctors had done what they could. They gave her their prognosis. Manage the pain, accept the limitation. But she refused to accept it as final. I taught her a simple practice. Each night before sleep, She would close her eyes and feel her hands whole. Not imagine them whole, feel them. She would mentally perform the actions that arthritis denied her, holding her grandchild's hand without wincing, writing a letter with ease, opening a jar without assistance. She felt the sensation of flexibility, the absence of pain, the naturalness of movement. She did not beg for healing. She did not plead with a distant power. She simply assumed the feeling of the wish fulfilled. Within weeks, the inflammation began to subside. Within months, the mobility returned. Her doctors called it spontaneous remission, a term they use when they cannot explain what has happened. But there was nothing spontaneous about it. She had changed the mental pattern, and the body, always obedient to consciousness, reorganized itself accordingly. You see, your body does not act independently of your mind. It cannot. Every cell, every organ, every system is under the jurisdiction of subconscious instruction. When you persistently hold an image of illness, limitation, or decay, the body accepts this as its blueprint. When you hold an image of vitality, strength, and wholeness, the body moves toward that pattern instead. This is why suggestion is so powerful during illness. If a doctor speaks with authority and tells you that you will recover, your subconscious accepts it, and recovery accelerates. If he speaks with doubt or pessimism, that too is accepted, and decline follows. The words of authority figures penetrate deeply because your mind is already in a receptive state, seeking direction. But you are your own ultimate authority. You do not need to wait for permission from another to claim your health. You do not need a diagnosis to change before you can change your belief. Start where you are. Accept no verdict as final unless it aligns with what you wish to experience. You are not sentenced to a life you did not choose. You are not bound by statistics, by history, or by the judgments of those who claim to know better. The only authority that governs your experience is the one you grant through belief. I have watched people walk away from diagnoses that were meant to be permanent. I have seen individuals defy every prediction made about their futures. And in every case, the turning point was the same. They refused to accept the verdict. They did not argue with it. They did not fight against it with fear or desperation. They simply turned their attention elsewhere toward the life they intended to live. This is not denial. Denial is resisting what is. What I am describing is a conscious redirection of mental energy. You acknowledge the present condition without giving it authority over your future. You see it as temporary, as something passing through your experience, not as something rooted in your identity. Let me be clear. The condition you are facing right now, whatever it may be, is not happening to you, it is happening times through times you. It is a manifestation of a belief system that has been operating beneath your conscious awareness. And because it came through you, it can be changed by you. The moment you accept that the power to create is within you, the external world loses its grip. You are no longer at the mercy of circumstances. You are no longer a victim of biology, economy, or fate. You become the architect of your own reality. This is where most people stumble. They want proof before they believe. They want to see the change before they commit to the assumption. But that is not how creation works. The evidence comes times after times the belief, not before. You do not wait for the bank account to fill before you assume abundance. You do not wait for the body to heal before you assume health. You assume it now. And the outer world has no choice but to conform. I want you to think about a sculptor standing before a block of marble. The sculpture already exists within that stone. The artist does not create it, he reveals it. He chips away everything that does not belong until only the intended form remains. Your life is the same. The version of yourself you wish to become already exists within you. Your work is not to build it from scratch. Your work is to remove every thought, every belief, every assumption that contradicts it. You see, your subconscious mind doesn't argue with you. It doesn't debate. It doesn't question whether what you're telling it is true or false, reasonable or absurd. It simply accepts. It accepts the dominant thought. It accepts the habitual feeling. It accepts what you repeat with conviction. This is why affirmation is not about convincing yourself of something you don't believe. It's about replacing the old recording with a new one. You've been affirming limitation all your life without knowing it. Every time you said, "I can't afford that," you were affirming poverty. Every time you said, "I always get sick in winter," you were affirming illness. Every time you said, "Nothing ever works out for me," you were affirming failure. And your subconscious mind listened. It took your word for it. It went to work creating circumstances that matched your declaration. Now you must use this same principle deliberately, consciously, with intention. When you affirm, "I am abundant," you are not lying to yourself. You are instructing your subconscious to bring forth the abundance that already exists in infinite supply. When you affirm, "I am healthy," you are activating the healing intelligence within your body. When you affirm, "I am confident," you are awakening the power that has always been yours. The subconscious does not recognize time. It does not understand future tense. When you say, "I will be successful," it hears delay, it hears postponement. But when you say, "I am successful," it hears a command, it hears present reality. And it begins immediately to reorganize your world to match that reality. This is not mysticism. This is mechanism. This is how the mind operates. You are not hoping for magic, you are applying law. I have seen people transform their entire financial situation within months by changing nothing but their inner conversation. I have seen bodies heal when doctors had given up hope, simply because the patient changed their habitual thinking. I have seen relationships restored, careers launched, and dreams materialize not through struggle, but through alignment. You are not trying to force the universe to bend to your will. You are aligning your consciousness with what is already true in the invisible realm. You are claiming what is already yours. This is why the mystics and the sages have always spoken of entering the silence, not the silence of mere absence of noise, but the silence where the clamoring of the ego ceases. The silence where you stop arguing with reality. The silence where you stop insisting that things should be different than they are. In that silence you discover something extraordinary. The universe is not against you. It never was. It was simply reflecting back to you the confusion and resistance you held within. When you surrender, the universe sighs in relief. Finally, it can give you what you've been asking for all along. But understand this clearly, surrender is not passive, it is not resignation, it is not sitting in a corner and accepting defeat. True surrender is the most powerful action you can take because it removes the one obstacle that has been blocking your good, your own interference. Think of it this way. A seed does not struggle to become a tree, it surrenders to the process. It allows the intelligence within it to unfold according to divine timing. It does not wake up each morning and panic about whether it is growing fast enough. It simply grows. You are that seed. The oak tree is already within you. But if you dig yourself up every day to check your progress, if you worry and fret and manipulate, you interrupt the natural process. Surrender is learning to trust the unseen roots growing beneath the surface. Now, here is where we must address a question that arises in nearly every mind. What about action? If I surrender, if I let go, does that mean I do nothing? Do I simply sit and wait for the universe to deliver? No. Surrender does not eliminate action, it transforms it. When you act from a place of fear, lack, and desperation, your actions are contaminated. They carry the vibration of struggle, they push against reality rather than flowing with it. And because the universe responds to consciousness, not merely to physical effort, these actions often produce limited results or none at all. But when you act from a place of surrender, when you have already accepted that everything is working out, that you are supported, that the outcome is assured, your actions become inspired, they become effortless, they become aligned. You no longer act because you are afraid of what will happen if you don't. You act because you are moved by an inner impulse, a natural unfolding of the creative intelligence within you. This is the difference between forcing and allowing, between striving and flowing, between human will and divine will working together. When you are aligned, the right actions reveal themselves, the right people appear, the right opportunities open. Not because you chased them down, but because you created the inner conditions for them to find you. This is the natural order of things. When your inner world is in harmony, your outer world reorganizes itself to match. It's not magic, it's law. The same law that governs the growth of a seed into a tree. The same law that turns an acorn into an oak. You don't see the acorn straining and struggling, do you? You don't see it worrying about whether it has what it takes to become a tree. It simply accepts the pattern already written into its nature, and it grows according to that pattern. You have a pattern within you too. A blueprint. And when you align your thoughts and feelings with that blueprint, when you stop fighting it and start cooperating with it, everything becomes easier. Not effortless, but easier. There's a difference. You still take action. You still show up. But the action flows from certainty rather than desperation. It comes from knowing rather than hoping. Let me tell you about a woman I once counseled who was drowning in debt. She came to me with a story I'd heard 100 times before: bad luck, wrong timing, other people's failures that became her burden. And yes, those things had happened. I'm not denying the facts of her situation. But facts are not fate. Facts are simply the current arrangement of circumstances. And circumstances can be rearranged. I asked her a simple question. When you think about money, what do you feel? She didn't hesitate. Fear, she said. Panic. Like I'm always one step away from losing everything. And there it was. The real problem. Not the debt itself, but the feeling state she lived in every single day. That fear was a magnet, and it was attracting more situations that would make her feel afraid. So we began to change the inner pattern. Not by denying the debt, but by shifting her relationship to it. Every morning and every night, she would sit quietly and actually feel what it would be like to have more than enough. Not fake it, not pretend the bills weren't there, but cultivate the genuine feeling of sufficiency, of security, of knowing that the universe is abundant and that she had access to that abundance. Within 3 months, she received a job offer that doubled her income. Within 6 months, she'd paid off more debt than she had in the previous 3 years. Did the debt disappear by magic? No. But the opportunities to eliminate it appeared because she had changed the signal she was broadcasting. She stopped being a person who feared money and became a person who expected prosperity. And here's what that demonstrates about the law. It doesn't operate piecemeal. It operates holistically. When you change one belief, you don't just change one outcome, you change the entire ecosystem of your life. Because every belief you hold sends out countless ripples, attracting circumstances, people, and opportunities that match its frequency. This is why partial commitment produces partial results. You can't affirm abundance for an hour and then spend the rest of your day worrying about bills. You can't visualize success in the morning and complain about your circumstances all afternoon. You can't declare health while simultaneously rehearsing your symptoms to everyone who will listen. The subconscious mind doesn't measure your effort, it measures your dominant mental attitude. And your dominant mental attitude is simply the thought patterns you return to most frequently, especially when you're not consciously monitoring your mind. This is what I mean when I say that transformation requires consistency, not intensity. 1,000 powerful affirmations spoken with emotion but immediately contradicted by habitual negative thinking will accomplish nothing. But a single belief, held quietly and consistently, even without dramatic emotion, will inevitably manifest. Because the law responds to conviction, not performance. You don't need to convince the universe. You don't need to prove your worthiness. You don't need to generate enough spiritual force to overcome resistance. You simply need to accept, as true, the reality you wish to experience. And acceptance isn't something you do once. It's something you return to, again and again, until it becomes more natural than doubt. Let me share something that often surprises people who are new to this work. The moment of transformation, the actual shift where your subconscious accepts a new belief, rarely feels dramatic. There's no lightning bolt, no cosmic confirmation, no certificate of achievement from the universe. What happens instead is quiet, subtle, almost anticlimactic. You simply stop arguing with the idea. One day, you realize you're no longer questioning whether it's possible, you're no longer rehearsing all the reasons it might not work. You're no longer scanning your circumstances for evidence that nothing has changed. You've simply moved on, internally, to the acceptance that it is done. And that's when everything external begins to shift, not because you've finally generated enough power, but because you've finally stopped interfering with the power that was always present. This is why you'll often notice that the breakthroughs come when you've released the pressure. You stop obsessing. You stop checking. You stop mentally rehearsing the lack of it. And suddenly, seemingly out of nowhere, the thing appears. The opportunity knocks. The conversation happens. The check arrives. But it didn't come from nowhere. It came from the shift in your inner atmosphere. It came because you finally let the seed grow without digging it up every few hours to see if roots had formed. Imagine you're holding a ball underwater. It takes effort to keep it submerged. You have to press down constantly, using force, using energy. The moment you release your grip, the ball doesn't struggle to rise. It doesn't need to be motivated or convinced or energized. It simply floats upward naturally, effortlessly, because that's what it was designed to do. Your desire is that ball. Your doubt, your worry, your constant mental checking, that's the hand holding it down. Stop holding it down, and it rises. Not because you made it rise, but because you stopped preventing it from rising. This is the core of what I'm showing you. The creative power doesn't respond to strain. It responds to acceptance. It doesn't need your anxiety. It needs your permission. And you give that permission not by doing more, but by resting in the conviction that it is already accomplished in the unseen realm where all things are first formed. Now, you might ask, does this mean I sit and do nothing? Does this mean I ignore practical steps and just wait for the universe to deliver? Not at all. But here's the distinction that changes everything. Inspired action flows from the state of fulfillment. Desperate action flows from the state of lack. One is magnetic, the other is repellent. When you're truly convinced internally that your desire is already yours, you move differently in the world. You take steps that feel natural, intuitive, aligned. You're not forcing doors open. You're walking through doors that open before you because you've assumed they would. You're not chasing. You're being led. There's a lightness to it, a rightness, and opportunities seem to arrange themselves with an intelligence that your conscious mind could never orchestrate. This is what I call living from the invisible. Most people wait until they can see the bridge before they take the first step. But you're learning to step into the mist, trusting that the ground will appear beneath your feet. And it does. It always does when you move with faith rather than fear. I've watched people cling to certainty like it's a life raft. But certainty in the material world is an illusion. The only true certainty is in the invisible realm and the principles that govern creation itself. When you align with those principles, when you plant your seeds in that fertile darkness, you're working with forces that built galaxies. Do you really think those forces will fail to arrange a meeting, open a door, or shift a circumstance in your favor? Let me tell you something about timing. People say the timing isn't right, or maybe next year, or I'm waiting for the perfect moment. But timing isn't something that happens to you, it's something that happens through you. When your subconscious is saturated with belief, when your mental atmosphere is charged with expectation, you don't wait for right timing. You create it. You become a magnet for synchronicity. I've seen this play out in the most remarkable ways. A woman once told me she needed to relocate for a job opportunity, but the housing market was impossible. She'd been searching for months with no success. I told her to stop searching with her eyes and start building with her imagination. Every night, she felt herself in her new home. She walked through its rooms in her mind. She felt the relief, the satisfaction, the rightness of it all. 3 days later, a friend of a friend mentioned a property that wasn't even listed yet. The owner wanted a quick, quiet sale to someone trustworthy. The price was exactly what she could afford. The location was ideal. She moved in within 2 weeks. Coincidence? No. Correspondence. The outer world had simply rearranged itself to match the inner conviction. This is the natural operation of consciousness when you stop interfering with it. You don't make these things happen through force or manipulation. You allow them to happen through alignment. When you live from this place of alignment, you begin to notice something remarkable. The obstacles that once seemed insurmountable start to dissolve, not because they were never real, but because your relationship to them has fundamentally changed. You're no longer fighting against life, you're flowing with it. I've seen this principle work in countless lives. A woman came to me years ago, completely overwhelmed by financial pressure. She had been affirming prosperity for months, but nothing was changing. When I asked her to describe how she felt when she made these affirmations, she said, "I feel desperate. I feel like I'm begging the universe for help." There was the problem. She wasn't affirming from a state of having. She was affirming from a state of lack. Every word she spoke was saturated with the feeling of not having enough. And the subconscious mind, being impersonal and literal, simply responded to that dominant feeling. It gave her more experiences of not having enough. I asked her to try something different. Instead of affirming what she wanted, I asked her to remember a time when she felt genuinely secure. A moment from her childhood when she was carefree, when every need was met without her having to worry about it. She closed her eyes and went back to that memory, playing in her grandmother's garden, the sun warm on her face, knowing that dinner would be ready, that she was loved, that everything was taken care of. That's the feeling, I told her. That's the state you need to live in. She began to practice entering that state several times a day, not thinking about money, not visualizing checks or bank accounts, just resting in that feeling of security, of being cared for, of knowing that all was well. Within weeks, unexpected opportunities began to appear. A former colleague reached out with a freelance project. A refund check arrived from an old insurance policy she'd forgotten about. A neighbor mentioned a position at her company that was perfect for this woman's skills. None of these things came through struggle. They came through alignment. When she changed her inner state, her outer world reorganized itself to match. This is how consciousness works. It's not magical thinking. It's the natural law of mind. Your subconscious is constantly scanning your dominant emotional state and attracting circumstances that correspond to it. When you feel abundant, you notice opportunities for abundance. When you feel loved, you attract loving relationships. When you feel secure, you make decisions from confidence rather than fear, and those decisions lead to different outcomes. The key is consistency. You can't feel secure for 5 minutes and then spend the rest of the day worrying and expect miracles. Your subconscious responds to the habitual patterns of your thought and feeling. It's the mental atmosphere you live in most of the time that determines your experience. This is why I keep emphasizing the importance of persistence. You're building a new mental atmosphere. You're creating a new habitual dwelling place for your mind. And just like moving into a new home, it takes time to feel completely settled, to feel like this is really where you belong. I've watched people transform their entire lives by simply refusing to go back to the old mental neighborhood. They made a decision, a firm, unwavering decision that they would no longer entertain thoughts of lack, limitation, or fear. And whenever those old thoughts came knocking at the door, they politely but firmly closed it and returned to their chosen state of mind. This doesn't mean you become rigid or tense about it. There's no strain in this process. You're not gritting your teeth and trying to force yourself to think positively. That's exhausting and counterproductive. Instead, you're gently but consistently redirecting your attention. You're choosing, moment by moment, to dwell on what you want rather than what you fear. Think of it like training a young puppy. You don't beat the puppy when it wanders off. You simply call it back. Again and again, with patience and love. Your mind is the same way. It will wander. It will drift back to old patterns, but you simply call it back. You redirect it to your desire, to your wish fulfilled, to the feeling of already having what you want. And here's something beautiful that happens over time. It gets easier, much easier. The new thought patterns become stronger. The neural pathways in your brain literally change. What once required conscious effort becomes automatic. The feeling of having your desire becomes your natural state, and the old feelings of lack and limitation feel foreign and uncomfortable. You'll reach a point where you can't even remember what it felt like to worry about your desire. You'll look back and think, how did I ever live that way? How did I ever believe I didn't have this? That's when you know the impression has been made. That's when you know your subconscious has accepted the new blueprint. But until that point arrives, you must remain faithful. You must remain consistent. You must continue to impress your subconscious mind with the reality of your desire fulfilled, regardless of what your physical senses report to you. This persistence is not passive waiting. It is active faith. It is the daily, deliberate act of returning to your inner vision. It is saying to yourself, morning and evening, I am now the person I wish to be. I have now what I desire to have. I feel now what I wish to feel. You do not beg. You do not plead. You do not hope. You claim it as already yours. And here is something vital that many people overlook. Your subconscious mind does not reason inductively. It does not argue with you. It does not say, that's impossible, or, you're not worthy of that. Those voices are from your conscious mind, from your conditioning, from the opinions of others that you have accepted as truth. Your subconscious simply accepts what you impress upon it most consistently and most emotionally. This is why a person can be brilliant intellectually and yet live in poverty. This is why someone with little formal education can rise to great wealth. The difference is not in their reasoning power. The difference is in what they have accepted at the subconscious level. The difference is in the mental atmosphere they habitually dwell in. Your mental atmosphere is the sum total of your dominant thoughts and feelings. If you walk around all day thinking thoughts of lack, of limitation, of fear, of resentment, then that is the atmosphere you are breathing mentally. And from that atmosphere, your experiences must grow. You cannot plant seeds of negativity and expect to harvest abundance. The law will not permit it. But when you change your mental atmosphere, when you begin to breathe the air of success, of health, of joy, of fulfillment, then your outer world must eventually reflect that inner climate. It has no choice. This is law. This is principle. This is how your mind works. I have seen people transform their entire lives by doing nothing more than changing the thoughts they think habitually. I have seen marriages restored, health renewed, financial conditions completely reversed, not through struggle, not through force, but through the quiet, persistent application of mental and spiritual law. You see, when you truly understand this, you realize that you are never stuck, you are never trapped, you are never at the mercy of circumstances. You always have the power to retreat into your inner sanctuary and begin to build a new mental equivalent. You always have the ability to choose a different thought, to imagine a different outcome, to feel a different feeling. And here's what I want you to understand on the deepest possible level. The subconscious mind doesn't resist change. It doesn't argue with you. It doesn't say, but you've been this way for 40 years, so you can't change now. That's the conscious mind talking. That's the ego, clinging to familiar patterns because they feel safe, even when they're destroying you. Your subconscious is perfectly willing to accept a new blueprint at any moment. It's waiting for clear, consistent direction. It's like a garden that will grow whatever seeds you plant, whether those seeds are flowers or weeds. It makes no moral judgments. It simply responds to the dominant impressions you make upon it. This is why a single decision, made with complete conviction, can sometimes transform a life overnight. When you truly decide, not wish, not hope, but decide with your whole being, you align your conscious and subconscious minds in the same direction. You stop sending mixed messages. You stop sabotaging yourself with doubts and contradictions. And when that alignment happens, miracles unfold. I've seen people heal from so-called incurable conditions when they finally surrendered their fear and claimed their divine right to health. I've seen people buried in debt create wealth when they stopped identifying with poverty and began to feel prosperous from within. I've seen broken relationships restored when one person changed their mental attitude and stopped projecting resentment. The key word is consistency. You cannot affirm abundance on Sunday and complain about lack all week. You cannot visualize health in the morning and worry about disease all afternoon. You cannot claim confidence while mentally rehearsing failure. The subconscious responds to your habitual thinking, not your occasional efforts. This is why I recommend a disciplined practice. Choose your ideal, define it clearly, then, twice daily morning, upon waking and evening before sleep, enter into your mental sanctuary and impress this ideal upon your subconscious mind. Feel it as real. See it as accomplished. Give thanks for its manifestation. Between these sessions, whenever the old thoughts try to return, gently redirect your mind. You don't fight negative thoughts. You simply refuse to energize them. You replace them with your chosen ideal, again and again, until the new pattern becomes automatic. This process of replacement isn't suppression. Many people confuse these two completely different actions. Suppression is trying to force down a thought while it still has emotional charge. It's like holding a beach ball underwater, exhausting and temporary. The moment you relax, it springs back up with even more force. Replacement is different. You're not fighting the old thought. You're simply choosing to focus your attention elsewhere, on something that serves your highest good. You're withdrawing the energy of your attention from what you don't want and consciously directing it toward what you do want. Think of your attention as sunlight. Whatever you shine it on grows. If you keep shining it on your problems, your fears, your limitations, they flourish. They seem to multiply and take over your entire mental garden. But the moment you turn that same light toward your ideal, toward the solution, toward the life you're choosing to create, those seeds begin to sprout and grow. I want you to understand something that will free you from so much unnecessary struggle. Your subconscious mind doesn't care which thoughts you feed it. It doesn't judge. It doesn't say, this is a good thought or this is a bad thought. It simply accepts what you consistently impress upon it and works to make it real in your experience. This is why consistency matters more than intensity. 1 hour of concentrated affirmation followed by 23 hours of worry and doubt will not yield results. But 15 minutes of sincere, relaxed repetition, morning and evening, coupled with a gentle, persistent redirection of thought throughout the day, will transform your entire life. The transformation happens gradually, then suddenly. For weeks, you might not see obvious external changes, but something is shifting beneath the surface. New neural pathways are forming, old patterns are dissolving. Your subconscious is reorganizing your entire perceptual system. Then one day, you notice something different. Maybe you respond to an old trigger with calmness instead of anxiety. Maybe an opportunity appears that perfectly matches your desire. Maybe you simply feel different, more confident, more peaceful, more aligned with your true self. These small shifts are evidence that your mental diet is working. Don't dismiss them as coincidence. And when you do notice these shifts, acknowledge them. Express gratitude for them. This isn't about becoming arrogant or complacent. It's about reinforcing the positive feedback loop. When you celebrate the evidence of your progress, you're telling your subconscious mind, yes, this is what we want more of. You're programming success into your mental operating system. I've seen people transform their entire lives by simply paying attention to what's working instead of obsessing over what's not. They stop waiting for the big dramatic breakthrough and start appreciating the small victories the moment they caught themselves thinking positively instead of negatively, the morning they woke up feeling hopeful instead of anxious, the conversation that went surprisingly well. These moments are breadcrumbs leading you toward your desired destination. Follow them. Learn from them. Let them build your confidence and strengthen your faith. Now, here's something else I want you to understand about this journey. Your mental diet will be tested. Life doesn't stop throwing challenges at you just because you've decided to think more positively. In fact, sometimes it feels like the universe is deliberately testing your resolve the moment you commit to change. You'll have days when maintaining your mental diet feels effortless, and days when it feels like you're fighting an uphill battle. Both are normal. Both are part of the process. The question isn't whether you'll face resistance, it's how you'll respond when you do. When you have a difficult day, when you slip back into old patterns of thinking, don't interpret it as failure. Don't use it as evidence that this approach doesn't work or that you're not capable of change. Instead, see it for what it is. A temporary setback, a moment of forgetting, an opportunity to recommit. The strongest mental muscles are built through resistance. Every time you catch yourself thinking negatively and consciously choose a better thought, you're strengthening your mental discipline. Every time you refuse to indulge in worry and anxiety, you're expanding your capacity for faith and peace. This mental training isn't a luxury, it's a necessity for anyone who wants to live a life of purpose and fulfillment. Your subconscious mind is always recording, always impressionable, always working. The question is, what are you programming into it? I've seen people transform their entire existence by committing to just 30 days of disciplined mental practice, 30 days of refusing negative thought patterns, 30 days of affirming their desired reality before sleep and upon waking, 30 days of seeing themselves as they wish to be rather than as they fear they are. The transformation isn't always dramatic or sudden. Sometimes it's subtle. You find yourself responding differently to old triggers. Situations that once sent you into spirals of anxiety now barely register. People who used to irritate you suddenly seem less bothersome, not because they've changed, but because you have. Your inner world has shifted, and consequently, your outer experience follows suit. This is the law in action. This is your subconscious mind accepting new patterns and projecting them onto the screen of your life. Now, let's address something crucial: the difference between wishful thinking and genuine mental work. Many people confuse the two, and this confusion leads to disappointment and cynicism about these principles. Wishful thinking is passive. It's hoping something good will happen while simultaneously harboring doubts and fears. It's saying affirmations without conviction, like a child mechanically reciting homework they don't understand. Wishful thinking lacks the emotional component that gives your thoughts creative power. Genuine mental work is active and engaged. It requires you to feel the reality of your desire, to live in the assumption that it's already accomplished. When you do this correctly, there's a sense of quiet knowing, a peace that comes from feeling the work is done. You're not anxiously hoping, you're confidently expecting. Think of a farmer who plants seeds. He doesn't dig them up every day to check if they're growing. He doesn't stand over the field wringing his hands with worry. He plants, waters, and trusts in the natural process. He has confidence because he's seen the harvest before. He knows the law of growth. You must approach your mental seeds the same way. Plant them in your subconscious through feeling and belief. Water them with consistent attention and faith. Then trust the process. Your subconscious mind doesn't argue with you. It doesn't question whether you deserve what you're asking for. It simply accepts what you consistently impress upon it and begins to express it in your external world. This is why doubt is so destructive. Every time you plant a seed of your desire and then immediately dig it up to check if it's growing, you interrupt the natural process. You must learn to plant your desire once, water it with faith, and then leave it alone to germinate in the darkness of your subconscious mind. I've watched people sabotage their own demonstrations countless times through impatience. They affirm their desire in the morning, then spend the afternoon worrying about how it will come to pass. They pray at night for prosperity, then wake up anxious about their bills. This is like planting a garden and then pouring poison on it every few hours. The key is persistence without strain. Keep your mind gently focused on the end result. When doubts arise, and they will, don't fight them. Simply redirect your attention back to your desired state. Think of it like training a puppy. You don't punish the puppy for wandering off. You simply guide it back, again and again, with patience and consistency. Here's a practical technique I want you to use starting tonight. Before you sleep, spend 5 minutes in a state of drowsy relaxation. In this state, your conscious mind is quiet, and your subconscious is most receptive. Now, construct a simple scene that would occur after your desire is fulfilled. Make it brief, just a few seconds long. If you desire financial freedom, perhaps you see yourself looking at a bank statement with satisfaction. If you desire health, feel yourself moving with ease and vitality. If you desire love, imagine a friend congratulating you on your happiness. Keep the scene simple, but make it sensory rich. Feel it real. Repeat this scene over and over like a gentle lullaby until you drift off to sleep. You're impressing your subconscious in its most receptive state. You're giving it the blueprint from which to build your new reality. And then, this is crucial, release it. Don't carry the burden of making it happen. That's not your job. Your job is to define what you want and feel it as real. The subconscious mind's job is to bring it into manifestation through ways you cannot consciously foresee.